This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I am really grateful. I am really grateful to have this place to talk about faith and politics and big ideas in our culture with all kinds of really interesting people, really accomplished people in their respective craft, people that come in goodwill, in good faith. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And remember, I say this every time, subscribe or follow depending on your app and leave us a rating, but especially if you get a chance to write a review on Apple or one of the major apps, it really does help us. All of it helps get the word out so more people can participate in the conversation. Like the one I am very excited to be having today with Tim Alberta. Tim Alberta is a staff writer for The Atlantic and the former chief political correspondent for Politico. And he's written for dozens of other publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Sports Illustrated, and Vanity Fair. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, American Carnage, on the front lines. Just like clockwork, Charles Mingus III always wants to participate in these conversations.
Mine's asleep on the couch over here, so as long as the UPS guy doesn't come.
That must be it. I think we're getting some packages, but we'll just let him chime in here and there if everybody's okay with that. Tim is the author of the New York Times bestseller American Carnage, on the front lines of the Republican Civil War and the rise of President Trump, and the newly released The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism, which we'll be discussing today. He co-moderated the final Democratic presidential debate of 2019 and frequently appears as a commentator on television programs in the U.S. and around the world. But today, we get to have him talk of politics and religion without killing each other. So speaking of politics and religion, you got to be feeling pretty good about your Detroit Lions, huh?
Oh, man. I mean, I was until Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I was until the thing is, look, like at this stage in the season to be 8-3 and, really prohibitive as the front runner to win the division, you'll take it.
Yeah.
100 times out of 100. And we've never even won the division. Yeah. Since they became the NFC North, we've never won it. That being said, the last 3 weeks, a lot of red flags, a lot of weaknesses exposed, and if the coaching staff doesn't make some adjustments, then I think we're going to be probably one and done in the playoffs. But the overall trajectory of the franchise is terrific, and I'm happy with that. But I started to get a little greedy, like when your team starts 8-2,
yeah.
you start having dreams about the Super Bowl, and I don't think they're quite there yet.
Yeah, well, I'm a diehard Mets fan, and college football, I root for Auburn, so my heart's broken every year, and especially years like this year with the Mets, it has so much promise, and I fall for it every damn time.
Yep. Yeah. But you keep coming back for more.
Keep coming back for more. Ever since the days of Doak Walker and Billy Sims and Barry Sanders. Oh, you probably grew up on Barry Sanders, right?
So Barry Sanders was probably my first love. We moved to Michigan. I was born in New York. We moved to Michigan in '89, which is the year that they drafted Barry. So, and I would have been 3 years old at the time, and that was like some of my very first memories are of like my brothers and my dad like screaming at the television as Barry would make some gravity-defying maneuver. And so, I grew up just obsessed with Barry.
That's awesome. I was reading up about your dad, and he went to the same high school that my sister-in-law graduated from, Mahwah, New Jersey. I guess that's where your parents met, right?
No kidding. Yeah. Both of my parents went to Mahwah.
Yeah. And there's something to be said. For folks who aren't really sports fans, there is something. I don't mean to make too much of this, but I believe it's transcendent. I think it was Bob Costas who once said that when I couldn't talk about anything else with my father, I could still talk about baseball. And I always feel like I watch the Mets religiously, so to speak. But it always feels in a way like those who've gone before me, my Uncle Jerry, my grandfather, who I called Zeta, it feels in a little way like they're in the room with me, watching a game with me. So I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah. There's something, and the generational component of it.
Yeah.
Right. Being able to, share those memories with your kids that you had with your dad, and he had with his dad. And, there's something very special about it.
Speaking of your kids, I want to take a stab in the dark at something here. I was wondering if your kids are named after your favorite president, your favorite apologist, and your favorite writer.
No. Although you got the apologist right.
Because it's spelled with Lewis, right?
It is, yes. So, yes, we did name him after C.S. Lewis. But the other two, we had some other inspiration for. Okay. But this is new ground on a podcast, talking kids' names.
Yeah.
No. Although I did make a strong case to name one of my sons Calvin for Calvin Johnson.
Oh, okay.
And my wife shot that one down. So
what did they call him? Megatron or something?
Yeah, that was his nickname. Yeah. We could have just named him Megatron.
There you go.
I guess
there's hope yet.
There's right. We just need to have a few more.
I was thinking more in terms of you. I think Doak is going to make a comeback.
Yeah, well, that's a harder sell these days. These kids now they've all got names. It's funny. My kids are like all elementary school age, and boy, there's not a Tom or a Bill or a Joe like in any of these classes.
Yeah.
It's just I'm not being like old man shakes fist at cloud. I'm genuinely fascinated by it, including my kids. My kids have sort of different names, so it's just interesting how like my generation doesn't want to name their kid anything traditional.
I'm just thinking now. I bet you could make a case for Lane, Layne, for Bobby Lane.
I think as soon as she looked up the history, she would know. My wife would know. Bobby Lane was not an exemplary citizen.
Oh, okay. All right. I didn't know his story. I just know I was looking up, I was brushing up on my Lions history, and that name comes up a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he was apparently quite a character.
Oh,
and
yeah,
there are some legendary stories about him.
Was he one of the guys that got suspended for a year, like in the early 60s? Am I remembering this right?
I think so. He got there were a few different run-ins with Bobby Lane, as far as the league, as far as the law, as far as his other teammates, and like he was one of these guys who apparently was like, beers and cigarettes at halftime, and was like, that like they didn't do Gatorade back then.
Yeah.
They had a very different health regimen. But yeah, he's sort of a reviled figure and some of this is kind of taken on a life of its own. But like, there's this whole thing about the curse of Bobby Lane, how he cursed the Lions when they traded him, and they haven't won since. I think it's nonsense. I think it's made up. But like, there's a whole complicated history there with Bobby Lane. So anyway, long story short, I don't think we'd be naming one of my children after.
So the way you describe him, I don't know if he had a direct line to God with prayers for that sort of thing. I think the Billy Goat, maybe with the Cubs, had a better shot.
Yes.
Yes. So on a more serious note, I was wondering if you're really candid and you get very personal in the book. It's obviously like just some of the best reporting I've read in a long time. But I was wondering if doing that kind of work, a little background, by the way, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you grew up, your dad's pastor and grew up in a evangelical church. Do you still consider yourself an evangelical? And is that the kind of thing you discuss with your dad?
So my dad and I had an awesome relationship, and we could talk about just about anything, sports, theology, politics. And we had some pretty good disagreements, but they were always healthy, respectful disagreements. I think the term evangelical meant more to him than it's ever meant to me. And I think that that's a generational thing. There was really a sort of, there was an evangelical moment and really a feeling of movement kind of coming out of the 50s into the 60s, post-World War II, Billy Graham, you have sort of some of the old labels are falling by the wayside a little bit, and you've got a lot of Christians now sort of amalgamating under this kind of loosely defined thing of evangelicalism. And I think for people like my dad, that was important to them. That like he wasn't just a Christian; he was an evangelical Christian, which meant, I think, in so many ways that that he took his faith really seriously. That he wasn't, that his Christianity was not a casual thing to be kind of picked up and put down and slotted into schedules, but that it was who he was at his core of his identity. And I'm not, I wouldn't differentiate myself in terms of what I just said, but I guess where I do diverge, and I think a lot of folks that I've met who are, in my rough age range think of this the same way. I use this phrase in the book. I say that we're sort of the children of the moral majority. And I think for a lot of us who, our parents were wrapped up in that movement and in the label, and I think a lot of us have seen how some of that got hijacked and corrupted and turned into something else. And, there's just, for me, a simplicity in saying, like, I'm a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm and I don't know that I need to attach. Matter of fact, I do know that I don't need to attach anything more to it, just because it feels superfluous. That's not to say that I don't take any issue necessarily with people who do continue to identify as evangelical. I know lots of them, and they have their heart in the right place. But I do get concerned that the unbelieving world hears that label, they hear that word, and they associate something altogether different with it than what these folks mean when they go by it. And if the goal of the evangelical is to evangelize, right, there's a verb in there, like you're supposed to be evangelizing. I think it's very hard to evangelize to someone who's not a believer when they hear the word evangelical, because they attach some pretty rotten things to that word, and I don't really blame them. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but no, not necessarily. If somebody describes me that way, I'm not going to fight them on it. It's the tradition I grew up in, and I certainly identify with that tradition, but just plain old follower of Jesus is good enough for me.
Yeah. No, it makes sense because it gets to the heart and the meaning of it. And frankly, I'm ambivalent about seeding words, like good words, because it's become, I've noticed, I started noticing it. I became a Christian around late 2000, around this time of year, maybe October-ish of 2000. And I remember when Sarah Palin came on the scene, and I started hearing words like patriot and freedom in a different way. And then eventually I started thinking specifically of evangelical in a different way. I proudly embraced my newfound theological moorings or identity as an evangelical. So I hesitate to cede that word to the kinds of hucksters that you describe at great length in the book. So I would say I'm ambivalent about it, but I have a different question. But before we move on, I wanted to tell you about something else that's important. Money. Specifically your money. In all seriousness, I wanted to tell you about my advisor and my friend, George Mesa. George runs Mesa Wealth Management. And with George, it's not just about money. It's about helping us manage our present and plan for our future. And unlike a lot of other firms out there, George and I actually have a relationship. He knows me, he knows my family, and I know his wonderful family. I also know his firm and the incredible team he's put together, from his chief investment officer to some of the other great people in his office, like Jessica, their head of operations, that are always there to help me and with all aspects of our portfolio. You see, the thing is, I got a lot going on. I guess we all got a lot going on, and I don't have the time to watch our investments all day, every day. And even if I did, I don't have the experience and expertise that George's team collectively has. So we get the entire Mesa Wealth Management team, all their expertise and all their integrity. And again, it's based on George knowing me personally, knowing my goals, and even the kind of risk that's appropriate for me to take, which, by the way, could change from one season to the next. And they're on top of all of that. So if you want George Mesa and Mesa Wealth Management to be on your team, just visit their website, mesawealth.com. That's MEZA wealth.com, www.mesawealth.com. And that will also be in our show notes, so you can check that. And now, back to our show. You dealt with two figures that have had an impact in my life in two very different ways. Ravi Zacharias, I was introduced to his work before I became a Christian, and then he was arguably a part of that journey that led me, as he would describe, he cleared a lot of the brush for me, having grown up as an observant Jew, for me to be able to finally, after 6 months of intense study and reading and thinking, to be able to read the New Testament and be powerfully compelled by starting with Jesus' teachings, right from Matthew 5. But then eventually getting to a book like James, which was written directly for a guy like me, to the 12 tribes. I felt and dealt with some things, and then eventually I got to know Ravi, and I'm still friends with one of his kids. I also live in the valley where John MacArthur has a great deal of influence. It's where Masters University is. So a lot of the churches around here are basically MacArthurian churches. And you cover both Ravi and Johnny Mac in the book. Mike, I know that when stuff came out about Ravi in particular, I'm still working through the implications of that. I'm still grappling with certain theological convictions I have congealed as sort of moorings of my faith, and have had to question basically everything. And part of it is my own, part of it is my own proclivity to idolize a guy like that. He wasn't like I considered him a mentor, but was he even more than that? Did I just defer to his teachings? So I don't know. Kind of a little bit of background on me, but all that to ask you: are there aspects of your own theology or certain beliefs that are part of your faith that you've questioned or reconsidered?
Yeah, well, boy, I mean that's a really interesting way into the question when thinking about Ravi, because everything you just described is certainly how I felt and how I continue to feel. My wife grew up a Hindu, and when she gave her life to Jesus, there were two primary influences, and one was my dad, and the other was Ravi Zacharias. And she'd read all of his books and watched all of his videos, as had I. We went to see him in person a couple of times, and that was just a gut punch, right? It was not just a gut punch; it was almost a gut punch, like you felt that you had in a bad dream, like it wasn't real, because we do, as mortal men of flesh and blood, we put these people on pedestals. Even and I write about this in the book, like even somebody like me, who I sort of pride myself on being like a kind of a hard-nosed, tough-minded, permanently skeptical reporter. I remember seeing the initial scuttlebutt about Ravi before the big stuff broke out. This was when Ravi was still alive. And
about a year before he died, there was a thing, the couple up in Toronto or something.
Yes, Loranne Thompson, I believe her name was, and who'd been basically accusing him of soliciting photos and grooming her, and kind of, and then he he countersued, I think, and the details are a little bit fuzzy to me. But I just remember when all that came out, thinking, "Oh, this is awful! Like, how could somebody try to take down Ravi Zacharias like this?" Like, it didn't even cross my mind, in other words, that it could have been true.
Yeah,
because he was so brilliant, and because he was so eloquent, so articulate, so persuasive, and yet, as we come to find out, when all of the dust had settled from the various investigations, it was exactly that brilliance and that eloquence and that ability to persuade that made him such a dangerous predator. And we're shocked by this, but we shouldn't be surprised by this, right? The devil masquerades as an angel of light, and I just don't know. I don't know. To your question, if there are specific, like I've wrestled over the years with a lot of different elements of kind of institutional Christianity, as it were. I don't know that I've faced serious theological crises of any real kind. Like my faith itself and my understanding of Scripture and my walk with the Lord has been pretty darn stable, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it without real gratitude. But I think a lot of the attachments to Christianity, a lot of the sort of sub-identities, and a lot of those proclivities that you and I were just describing, a lot of the loyalties that you feel. Those are the things that I've wrestled with. And to be completely honest with you, a big part of my writing the book was to kind of exercise some of that, because there was I think for most of my life, my adult life, my life as a journalist, I had really gone out of my way to avoid criticizing the church, criticizing organized religion. I was pretty reflexively defensive of the evangelical movement, even when I could see that things were very wrong. And I think there was just a tribal tendency there that was getting the better of me for a long time. And I think that's probably been my biggest struggle. Is I say late in the book that I feel at times in writing this that I was sort of wrestling with my dad's ghost, trying to say what is so obvious and so self-evident and so true to me that I had spent a long time just willfully ignoring.
Yeah. So before I do want to get more into your background, and the nature of the book is really interesting because you are entering a land that you're a native of. So I want to talk about that in a second. But first, I'm curious if being a Christian, identifying as a Christian, a follower of Jesus, as you say, did you ever face any hostility from your colleagues, from other journalists or other colleagues that you've worked with?
You know, it's funny because I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine, John Ward, who is a top-rate journalist himself, and John is a Christian, committed Christian, who has kind of gone through the ringer in his own faith journey a little bit, and he wrote a book about it called Testimony. And John and I were kind of comparing notes on this, like never any like outward hostility, but definitely a sense of estrangement a little bit. I think it's just, the world of elite media is not a natural fit for, like, I remember writing this a few years ago and I got a lot of feedback on it. Mostly people just surprised that I wrote it, but I said, like, in all the major newsrooms I've worked in, and and the people I've competed with from other newsrooms, and just swimming in these waters for a long time, like, I think I could count on one hand, like the number of people who own a gun, or the number of people who go to church on Sunday mornings. There's just some real obvious cultural and class divisions that exist in my industry, and I don't know that I'm necessarily well qualified to diagnose why that is, but it's just a reality of things. And I wouldn't say that I felt any hostility or any, or even unwelcoming attitudes. But there's just definitely a bit of like a almost curiosity at times, like a little bit of a zoo animal thing where you're just people are like, that's no kidding. Like people like you do exist. That's, but again, like I view that as an opportunity. And I hope we all would in our different walks of life, to try to be distinct and to try and own that distinctiveness and to not conform to the patterns of this world. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny the way you put that, because that's largely been my experience. I live in Southern California, deal a lot with folks in the entertainment industry, and there have been a couple times where it got heated, but it got heated for all the wrong reasons. One time I was at this poker game with a bunch of friends from the industry, and it was getting to midnight or whatever, and hey, sorry guys, we're going to church, and I got to take off. And as soon as I said church, the lady I was sitting next to, she sits up in her chair. She's like, why do all you people I'm like, wait. First of all, you kind of lost me at all you people, but you got onto this screed about Trump. I'm like, okay, let's kind of deconstruct your assumptions here. But that would be the interactions that went negative. It went negative for reasons that weren't well founded. But I was happy. I'm always happy to get. Maybe it's my training from Ravi and other reading and studying I've done as an apologist. But I'm always happy to get into that conversation, because more often than not, it is an opportunity, if you go about it in the right way, in a sort of curious way, inquisitive way, a way in good faith and goodwill, where you can build that relationship. I'm not like I guess if I am an evangelist, I'm not a transactional evangelist where I'm trying to close the deal. I think, if anybody's closing the deal, God's doing that work, Whereas maybe I can be in a relationship with him and I'm part of that larger set of ingredients that God's using for the bigger recipe,
I'm reminded when you just said that, my dad used to say that we're in sales, not management. And it's a funny way to put it, but it's also, I think, a helpful way to put it, because, I think you're selling every day, whether you realize it or not. Do you talk in a way? Do you behave in a way? Do you treat your spouse in a way? Do you treat your neighbor in a way? Do you treat your children in a way? Do you treat your enemies in a way that reflects Jesus, and that echoes with a distinctiveness that seems at once familiar but altogether alien? And that is evangelizing. I think there are often people who are uneasy with the idea of being an evangelist, of kind of being very vocal, trying to proselytize or whatever. But I think that sort of misses the point, right? Like there really is something to this idea of like, by their fruit you will know them. And we have to, now more than ever, it seems to me, in a culture that is more, I don't want to just say more hostile to Christianity, because that seems like it's getting into the persecution space, which I don't really want to get into. But I think, at the very least, a culture that is sort of less engaged with Christian virtue, with Christian doctrine than probably at any time in this country's history. People are highly suspicious of the church, and not without reason. And I don't know that we win them back by like getting in their face and wagging a finger and telling them, what Exodus 20 has to say. My sense is that the way that tide starts to turn is by modeling and by by selling without the hard sale, if that makes sense.
It's you bring up a really interesting point, because I've been kind of grappling with this for a long time. To answer your question, do I reflect Jesus? I'm reminded of, I don't know if you're familiar with, I forget the name of it, but it's a Velázquez painting, and it's Christ on the cross. And there's something about the background that he got a darker black color as the background than I'd ever seen, certainly in painting. So it makes the Christ figure luminescent, almost jump off the canvas. So my fear is that I reflect the black background more so than the Christ figure that's jumping off the canvas. But what I grapple with in what you're talking about there is, I've been a part of a few different Christian communities. My kids went to a Christian school. We were part of Grace Baptist, one of the Johnny Mack influenced churches, for the better part of a decade. And a lot of the testimony, or a lot of the witness, looked a lot like, hey, our kids are good looking. They're getting straight A's. My teeth are white. My wife is gorgeous. That's all the proof you need to know that I got it right, and you better become a Christian. I'm sure you know that approach to evangelism. So I become dubious when I see that sort of thing kicking into gear, because, frankly, a lot more often than not, it's bullshit. So, speaking of which,
that's a good transition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you grew up in the church, so I'd love for you to fill in some of the blanks there. I mean, the way I was thinking of it is like you are a citizen of that sort of subculture, whereas I came in, I didn't become a Christian until I was 29 years old, so I always felt like a little bit of an alien. But you speak the language fluently. You know that world. Those are your people. So I was curious, in the process of writing your book, I'd love for you to describe what it was like to actually go to the American Restoration Tour or the Reawaken America Tour, these events that are like kind of like a version of what you grew up in, but sort of through the looking glass, Alice through the looking glass kind of a thing. Is that fair to say, or am I being too dismissive of it?
Yeah, it's definitely fair to say. I mean, honestly, how did I feel? I felt sad for the most part. Because those things you're describing, I mean, it's such a cheap facsimile of what Christ offers, which is a kingdom that is his own, citizenship in that kingdom, and a rejection of these earthly tribal identities that are fleeting and ultimately inconsequential. And at so many of these events, so many of these churches, spend time with so many of these pastors and megachurch leader types, it's just like the main thing is no longer the main thing. There is so much, I would just say, obsession. I mean, it's not even like the sideshow is now center stage. There's so much obsession with the culture in decline and the country falling apart, and what the left is doing to your kids in the schools, and like, again, it is perfectly fine to want the best for your family, for your country, to see your community flourish and be safe, and that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with it. But we're told repeatedly throughout the Gospels that when those things are secondary, you can love them even better, right? And I think the sadness I'm describing comes from this sort of inversion of priorities, this willful distortion of the gospel that suits a political agenda, that suits a cultural agenda, that we're not called to pursue. In other words, so often it feels as though we think about our faith identity through the lens of our political identity, through the lens of our cultural identity, through the lens of our national identity, when we are called unambiguously to do the exact opposite, that we're supposed to be examining everything else that matters to us, our families, our favorite teams, our colleges, our jobs, our country. We are supposed to be looking at all of those identities through the lens of our belief in Jesus Christ. Because everything else is subservient and secondary. One of the things that Jesus talks about just incessantly throughout the Gospels is this idea of a kingdom of heaven, a kingdom of God. Uses those terms interchangeably. And he doesn't talk about it like it's some abstract idea. No, he talks about it like it's a real place.
Yeah.
A physical community with people and structures and rules and requirements, and it sounds a lot like a country, right? It sounds like a place. And he says you are a citizen of that place if you follow me, and everything else has to be secondary. So I think, just to return to the sadness, I felt a lot of emotions throughout the reporting of all this. At times anger, at times disgust, at times just deep disillusionment. But I think just sadness at the end of the day, because there are so many things in this world that just ultimately do not matter. And the idea, my dad used to say that God doesn't bite his fingernails. It was one of my favorite little quips that he used to deploy. And it's like the idea that we should be, as Christians, that we would take such a small view of God that we need to be like, crying out and screaming and kicking and tantruming and glomming onto like these political or these cultural figures to try and save us because we're under siege and the enemies are at the gates and they're coming for us, and like how small is your theology? Right. And that's the prevailing thing. It's sad. Yeah.
It's funny that you put it that way, because I think of God doesn't bite his fingernails. Like he's not anxious about how this is working out, and yet there's a sort of idolatry. I don't even know if that's the right word for it, but that we're trying to force history to come out the way we want it to, as opposed to submitting to the story that's being played out that we're a part of, and participating in the way that we're uniquely called to participate in it. I think it was I might be getting the wrong author here, but it was Newbigin who talked about making history come out just as we want it, just right. When you talk of the sadness, you did mention in the acknowledgments a dear friend of yours who's come to depression earlier this year, and it made me wonder if in doing this work, how's your mental health? Has it challenged, or in what ways did it affect your own mental health?
Yeah, that's a good question. It hasn't affected it negatively, and I feared that it would, to be quite candid. There were some days early on in this journey, because I spent about 4 years on this book, more or less, and there were some days early on where I really questioned what I was getting myself into, because
I would imagine certain situations that you're in, you're like, how did I get here?
And this is the thing, man. Like, listen, I had just come off of 4 years of intense 4 years of covering Trump and writing this book about Trump's takeover of the Republican Party, and January 6th, and like there was a good long stretch there where I was getting a couple death threats a week, and like it was just it was tough, it was ugly, and it was really and I made the decision to kind of move away from politics as a full-time thing, in part because it had been so dark and so ugly, and I just needed to see what else was out there for me. And so naturally, I transitioned into reporting on the Crackup of American Christianity, which in a lot of ways is much darker than anything related to electoral politics, right? Because I think the eternal implications and the eternal significance is just immeasurably more. So I worried about that at the front. But I gotta say, Corey, I've the whole process has definitely drawn me closer to Jesus, and I've been able to lean on him in ways that maybe I didn't ever really lean on him before. So maybe my faith is stronger. Maybe I've just become, maybe my relationship with him has become more intimate. But like I've looking back on the whole process, because listen, I've had friends and family and colleagues now who have read some of the opening chapters and they've been like, are you okay? Right?
Yeah.
Like wellness check kind of thing.
Yeah.
And looking back on it all now, in retrospect, I'm almost sort of surprised that I didn't suffer some sort of like breakdown along the way. But I was also, spending every day, in scripture and in prayer and making a really concerted effort to like, to do this in the way that the Lord wanted me to do it, I guess. And that made all the difference, I think.
It sounds like your upbringing really did help with that, like having the mom and dad that you did, having being taught discernment, having the family that you did. Like, it just sounds like a lot of your upbringing and a lot of your life has given you a more well-grounded spiritual formation to be able to enter into those environments. Because I was curious, if I entered into the Reawaken America, it just feels like a circus in all the wrong kinds of ways. But if I were to enter into that, at some point, I wonder if my, what is it called, fight or flight kicks into gear, Yeah. And the switch would just be flipped. So it sounds like your spiritual formation really helped you to deal with that in kind of a even-keeled way.
Yeah, it's interesting. My parents are really, my dad's gone now. He's with the Lord, but my parents are serious theological people, and I think that made an impression even when I didn't realize it was making an impression. I think understanding good theology is probably the key to understanding bad theology, right? And and for me, it's like C.S. Lewis said, we know that a line is curved. We know that a line is crooked because we have seen a straight line, right? So there's something to that, like to being able to walk into the Reawaken America tour and hear somebody screaming vulgarities, and then a moment later for everybody to have their hands in the air praying and singing hymns, where you look around and you're like, somewhere deep in your spirit, you just know this is not right. That's so I'm really grateful for that, because I do think some of that came from my upbringing. At the same time, I think some of it probably just came from those years of covering Trump and seeing, because there are some real uncanny parallels here between sort of the implosion of our politics, specifically of the Republican Party, and Trump's kind of laying waste to the institution of republicanism. I think that has in many ways kind of run parallel to what's happened inside the church. And I think kind of sifting through the wreckage of one probably helped prepare me for the other.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing I was really curious about was your reporting is just remarkable. So first of all, I'm curious just, in your profession, how you got interviews with the likes of Robert Jeffress or Jerry Falwell Jr. And two is, does it get harder? I mean, you published that book that was pretty prominent about Trump a few years ago. I'm wondering if it just, or the article. It's like, speaking of which, like the CNN article, by the way, I put in a good word. I want to get the CNN article as one of the Sydney Awards, the David Brooks favorite pieces of writing of the year. But like, how do you get not only those interviews, but how do you get your subjects to open up like they do? And then also, is it getting harder the more prominent some of your work gets?
Well, I suppose it will. I mean, and it probably has. It just means I have to work that much harder, which, that's kind of the fun in my line of work is like, I don't know, I enjoy the chase of having, if somebody says no and they don't want to talk to you, there are a lot of ways you can get around that. And there are a lot of ways that you can kind of maneuver. And I'm not talking about anything like unethical or like improper. I just mean like strategically where you can kind of apply some pressure to people who otherwise wouldn't want to talk. And then, okay, they'll talk, but just strictly off the record. Okay, they'll talk, but you have to keep these things on background. Okay, you can use this one thing from me. Well, the next thing you know, you're recording for hours and it's all on the record. Like there are just ways to kind of, I think at the end of the day, Corey, one of the constants that I've noticed in my career is that, number one, everybody feels misunderstood. Everybody in the world. Everybody feels misunderstood. So if you can give somebody the assurance that you're going to listen to them and that you're going to treat them fairly, which, listen, I mean, I don't always portray people in a flattering light, but I don't think I'm unfair to anyone. If someone is saying or doing crazy things, I will let that come through in my writing, but I don't take cheap shots at people. So ultimately, that's where your reputation in my industry really matters. And when I'm approaching people who are really reticent to talk to journalists, usually I can get them to talk to me because they'll look at my body of work, they'll ask around, and, my reputation's pretty good. And, I offer them a very transparent view of the process as far as how my reporting works and what, what things are fair game and what things they can do to sort of feel more at ease. And so we kind of work through that in a really transparent way. And I don't, if I'm going to take a sledgehammer to somebody, they know about it ahead of time. I mean, I had hours of conversations with Jerry Falwell Jr. Before the book went to print because, it's important to me that people know ahead of time what's going to come out. So I guess all that's just to say that, like, I am far from the smartest guy working in journalism. Like, I don't think that a lot of this is like, requires a PhD. It's just, it's people skills and it's understanding relationships and it's ethics and knowing, not to be exploitative and not to take advantage of people. If you tell the truth and you treat people fairly, you tend to go a long way.
Yeah, that's fair. I would imagine the personal encounters outside of your work as a writer have to be more challenging. Like Robert Costa in his piece on Sunday Morning shared this that you relate early in the book. Some folks at your dad's funeral came up to you and gave you crap about basically not towing the company line. And I'm guessing a lot of those folks haven't even read your work. They just heard more generally, oh, well, he's talking crap about Trump kind of a thing. I would imagine that's harder than, the more in-depth conversations you have with high-profile public figures like that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, especially, look, I don't lay all this at like the Trump doorstep. In fact, I've gone out of my way in a lot of what I've written over the years to try and explain that Trump is really just like a byproduct of all these other things that have happened. And he was kind of a creation of the culture gone crazy. But like, yeah, the Trump era, really did bring a lot of this to the surface. And, you've got people who you've known like your entire life who will just say like, well, you're a liar. Like, I don't believe you. You're part of the deep state, or you're fake news. And I believe Trump. And it's like, okay, like about the election, for example, right? Like, I've studied election law in all 50 states. I mean, and quite literally studied it like deeply in like the 10 battleground states that matter. Like, I know election law front and back. I've spent time in all these states at the county recorders, with the Secretary of State's offices, at the ballot processing facilities. Like, I know how all this stuff works. I've also spent, years talking with the people around Trump, his legal people, his political strategists, his, people in the West Wing. I've sat in the Oval Office with Trump and talked with him. So I can have all that experience, but somebody who I grew up with will just say, well, no, I don't believe you. I believe Trump, or I believe Michael Flynn, or I believe Mike Lindell, or I believe, Jenna Ellis, or like these people who are self-evidently full of it.
Right.
And now some of them are, admitted liars under oath.
Right. Jenna Ellis,
Yeah, but because I'm critical of Trump, or because I work for a magazine that has been critical of Trump, like, you're willing to throw away decades of kind of goodwill and of credibility and knowing me personally for these people, or for this guy more specifically, who thinks that you're a rube, by the way.
Right.
That's what's been pretty amazing to me.
I was curious, do you think I forgot her name, Paula White's or Ralph Reed's or Donald Trump for that matter, do you think they ever look at each other and acknowledge the hustle, like kind of take pride and do a victory dance, like, hey, we got over on these suckers? Or are they like method hucksters? Do they stay in character all the time?
No, they know. And yes, they absolutely do laugh. I know for a fact that they do, because I know. Look, and this is like, I can't help but sort of chuckle at it, because it's so silly, and it's just so, it's just parody, right? But it's also sad, because, Donald Trump has manipulated something so precious, so beautiful. You're like the person who, Jesus tells the parable of the man who finds a treasure buried in a field. And the man puts the treasure back, and he goes off and he sells everything he owns. And then he comes back and he buys the field. Because nothing else matters anymore. Nothing else matters. He found the treasure. And now he just has to buy the field. And that treasure is what Christians have found. And to Trump, it's just and to some of these other people, it is that treasure is just a tool. It's a weapon. It's currency to be exploited, and it's just, I think, sickening. Really, truly sickening to see good people, and let's be clear, most of these folks, they're really good people. They have good hearts, and they're earnest, and they've been lied to, and they've been manipulated, and they probably haven't been nearly as discerning as they need to be. I'm not letting them off the hook, but they have been systematically lied to, and their fears have been artificially exacerbated, and their grievances have been nurtured, and their resentment has been weaponized, and the end result is a just a gravely diminished witness for the God that they claim to follow, the God that they claim to be all sovereign and all powerful, and the treasure that they sold everything else for. Suddenly it's not a treasure anymore.
Yeah.
At least not to anybody looking from the outside. They don't see, they don't see, they don't look at these folks and see, oh wow, they really believe in something. They sold out for it completely. At least not in terms of their faith. Maybe they think about that in terms of something else, which is really sad. It's
funny. Yeah, I took note of one of the guys you describe in the book. He goes by the name of Jim Wright, and you described this. I forgot if it was you who was talking to him. I think it was you who was talking to him, and then Francis Collins got brought up, and he knew. I know all about Francis Collins, and he harvests baby parts to do his whatever. There was a part of me that it is cringeworthy on one level, but I not that I know that Jim Wright, but I know Jim Wright. I love Jim Wright. My heart goes out to Jim Wright. I have Jim Wright in my Bible study. We raised our kids in classes that we were attending for a decade plus with Jim Wright. So there's a part of me that really loves that dude, and I'm brokenhearted about where his gaze has fallen upon and his beliefs are kind of shaped by. So there's so much more, frankly, that we could do this literally for hours. I'm on page 2 of, I'm kidding you not, I have 17 pages of notes. So we could do this for hours. I mean, I want to get into the Trump conversion experience. I want to talk about David Barton and the influence he has on the Speaker of the House now. And but I do, before we start to wrap it up, who do you think is the audience of the new book, and who do you hope is the audience of the new book?
I think that much of the audience for this book will be folks who think that I am coming to clean house in the evangelical church, who think that I have the receipts and a list of the dirty deeds, and that there's going to be a reckoning, and that I'm going to make sure that all accounts are settled by the end of the epilogue. Who I hope reads the book are the people who don't know Jesus. And let me explain something, because my sense is that there are going to be a lot of those people who come for the carnage, who are distrustful of the church, and they may themselves be part of the church, by the way. Like, I've gotten lots of letters in the last couple of weeks from people who are Christians and who are members of churches, but who have had it up to their eyeballs with all the craziness and the corruption and the idolatry, and they want to see the house cleaning, and so they're going to buy the book, right? But then I think at the same time there are lots of people who are unbelievers who are just interested in the subject matter, and they think that I'm a good reporter, and so they just want to see me wreak havoc here. But what's really important, Corey, that I would say is, in my line of work, you're shining light into the darkness. Now, when you shine light into the darkness, you are going to expose, right? You're going to expose what is false and what is wrong. But you're also going to illuminate. You're going to illuminate what is true and what is right. And so what I really hope is that a lot of people who might buy this book for one set of reasons, might start reading because they're just like giddy about seeing the comeuppance for the evangelical movement. Again, C.S. Lewis said that we know what a crooked line looks like because we've seen a straight line. And I hope that what these people see is that Jesus is the straight line.
Yeah.
And that what I'm pointing to here is something that's gone terribly wrong, but that there's also something perfect and perfectly right that I'm inviting them to see. And I hope that it's both. And even if there's just one person out there somewhere in the world who finds their way to a relationship with Jesus because of this, then that will have been entirely worth it for me.
Yeah, it's not the answer I expected, but it makes total sense. Because you do cover many accounts of this sort of contentious mindset that there's us versus them, there's winning and losing, or what's the way that Liberty put it? Winning souls for Christ or something like that. That it's all
champions for Christ.
Champions for Christ, yeah. But your voice or your participation isn't in that contest, isn't in the win versus loss. You're not even operating at that level. So in a way, it is reflective of Christ. Christ was like, okay, y'all are going to be surprised that my path, my path to victory is through the cross.
Yes.
Yes. So it's just completely something that everybody who was talking about it at that time, the Zealots and the Pharisees and the Essenes, they were all trying to look at the Hebrew Bible and Torah and the writings, and they were trying to figure out what does Messiah look like. And Jesus comes along and he's like, it's not what any of y'all think. So,
yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's exactly our understanding of these things is so limited and so finite.
Yeah.
Which is why at the end of the day, we're called to be humble, right? We're called to knock and the door will be opened to us. But
I looked up that painting, by the way. What an interesting painting. And I couldn't tell, I don't know if you've looked at it closely enough. I forgot the name of the painting off the top of my head. I couldn't tell, was he wearing sandals or was he barefoot? Was the Christ figure barefoot?
I don't think, well, I'm looking at the copy in my office. Unless it's cut off prematurely, which I don't think it is. I don't think you can see his feet. At least not, you know what? I'm going to look it up while we're talking.
Yeah, I saw a couple different versions of it.
That is so interesting.
Because somebody you said at one point that somebody knew you were a faker because you might wear sandals or something. You made a reference to sandals. So when I look,
oh yeah. So let's see. Oh, I can't tell. Mine actually is. My frame is cut off below his lantern, but above his feet. I can't tell if he's wearing sandals or not.
Interesting.
There could be a whole theology podcast dedicated to that one. No.
There you go. All right. Well, I have a couple more questions, and then we can wrap it up. This is the TP&R question, and you've been answering it in a way, and a lot of your work is an answer to this question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So people who think differently than we do, who grew up differently than we do, have different beliefs than we do, and get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Boy, is it even possible? I mean, listen, I want to hope that it is. I really am a believer. Like I've spent a lot of time just traveling to different parts of this country, and I sincerely still believe that most people are pretty normal and are not defined by political identities in their everyday lives. Now, the caveat I guess I would offer is all of the sort of the ecosystem that we are now living in is designed to sort of force those identities onto us in ways that I think sociologists are going to be studying for like centuries to come. Like we've entered into a period of human history that's just completely different than anything that's come before us. And I'm talking like the last 10, 15 years. Like social media, internet, technology, connectivity, AI now, like all of it. Like we're we are through the looking glass in a lot of ways. So I think that we can talk about politics and religion without killing each other, but we probably have to be creative in thinking about the ways we do it, the mediums, the ground rules. Like when you talk to a friend or a family member who's just completely fired up about something or someone, and they're just, they're just, they are zealous, maybe overzealous. I think maybe that conversation starts with some kind of ground rules around the dialogue. And like one thing that my dad said to me when I was a kid that has always stuck with me is like the minute that you go ad hominem, the discussion is over, right? Like there's just no, like if you're trying to persuade someone to see your point of view, or if you're just trying to establish an argument that you think makes sense and you want the other person to see that, like the minute you go ad hominem to the man, like then it's just so. The tricky thing, as I talk about in the book, with specific to Christianity and to Trump, is like, and to my dad, is like some of the really weird, painful parts of my relationship with my dad before he died was when we would talk about Trump, for example. And my dad wasn't like a big Trumper, but he voted for him, and then he like really internalized it. Like when you would criticize Trump, you would criticize. He felt like you were criticizing him, even though I wasn't. But it became like this ipso facto, transferred of property thing where, and I think it was because he was insecure. Not even insecure. I think it was because he felt like a certain guilt about voting for Trump, and because he knew that he was just an immoral person and not the kind of leader that he'd always said, character is a prerequisite for political leadership, and suddenly now he's voting for this guy. And so there was some tension in our relationship over that. And I guess the point I'm making is that even though I never went ad hominem with my dad in those conversations, he interpreted it as ad hominem, even though I was talking about Trump. And so that's a roundabout way of saying, I wish I could put a bow on this in a really sunny side up way, Corey, but like, I have a pretty bleak outlook on our ability to have really healthy, constructive dialogue around some of these really divisive issues, because it seems more and more as though, even though a lot of us are pretty normal still and not like political animals, we are living in an environment where sort of all of the pressure points, all of the incentive structures, all of the environmental factors are kind of pressing us into conflict, and not into just like one-on-one, who am I and who are you conflict, but this sort of like tribal, guilt by association, corporate conflict. And that's hard. That's really, really, really hard. I mean, just in the last few weeks, the Israeli-Palestinian stuff has given us a new window into this. Like the groupthink and the inability of individuals to sort of pull out of kind of weird tribal, almost cult-like captivity. That's concerning to me. Yeah. And I would be lying if I told you that I saw a kind of quick or easy way out of that, because I think it's like a defining challenge for like my kids and their generation. No, you make some really, really important, apt points that a lot of the conversations I find myself in, I have to spend a good amount of time on peeling back the assumptions that kick into gear based on one or two data points that my conversation partner is assigning to me. Whether it's the shade of my skin or the color of my hair or the fact that I'm married to Miss Lisa or that I'm from
Jersey originally and living in Southern California. It could be any number of things, but there's this thing that Monty Guzman talks about as, what I think of it as dominoes, but she calls it something else. But it's like you learn one thing and, oh, well, now I know everything I need to know about you. So I end up having to peel back a lot of that before we could ever actually get to any of the substance. So, some really ad hominem. I think that is at the root of it. Just out of fairness to your dad, a lot of talk to this day isn't just about Trump. A lot of times it's assigned to anybody who's ever supported him, as if you couldn't have. Like you had to have come out of the womb already having all of the right answers, as opposed to grappling with, wow, well, I believe in these things. These things are very important to me. This is how I've practiced my faith in terms of what I vote for and who I vote for. And now here's this dude who's like the opposite of all the virtues that I believe in, the fruit of the Spirit kind of a thing. And, allowing somebody the opportunity to grapple with that. But, so some of the talk in the public square is assigning all of Trump's failings, all of Trump's anti-virtues to the people who ever even remotely supported him. So, yeah, that's a whole other...
No, you're exactly right. And I try to go out of my way, like it's like the third or fourth page of the book. Maybe not even, might be like the second page of the book. And kind of trying to describe how, there's no easy answer to this question of like, well, why do these evangelicals support Trump? It's like, okay, well, we're talking about tens of millions of people, so it's a pretty complicated question. And, you can kind of map these folks across a vast spectrum and understand that some of them, sure, they're like reactionary hypocrites, and they are like just people that you really cannot get to a place where you can have anything resembling a rational dialogue with them, because they're just not, they're not rational or respectable political actors. And there are people at the far other end of the spectrum who voted for Trump. They voted for Trump twice because, and they felt completely nauseous both times, and they never defended him once, but they just felt like the issue of abortion alone was just enough that they just felt compelled, that they would live with the guilt of it, but that they couldn't in good conscience vote for somebody who was pro-abortion. That's like, I get it. And we have to be able to view people holistically and try to be charitable with our assumptions. I've told people this story before, but we have a really dear family friend who is prone to saying some kind of like just like bizarre and provocative things, especially politically, and like during COVID and about vaccines and about Trump and all, like just like stuff that as a reporter, if I met him and did a man on the street interview for 15 minutes, I would walk away and be like, wow, that dude's crazy, right? But what you don't know about that dude is that he saves all of his money. He's an older guy. He's a bachelor. He lives like the most meager existence possible. He saves all of his money, and several times a year, he goes to South America and builds orphanages. And he's done this for decades. And he's like single-handedly like helped raise all these like orphaned children because of all the work he does. He makes all this money doing his contracting work. He's a like electrician, handyman guy. Makes all this money doing all this contracting work. Then goes over there and builds orphanages for kids. Doesn't want credit for it. Doesn't boast about it, just like. But that's what he does, right?
Yeah.
And so you would never know that if you spent 15, 20 minutes with that person just talking about Trump, talking about COVID, talking about masks or vaccines or Black Lives Matter or whatever, right? But like, how do we zoom out from that and try to, if we believe that humanity is made in the image of God, then that person is an image bearer of God. And, that transcends who they voted for. It transcends their cultural habits or their weird, points of view on certain things, and I have to train myself every day, Corey, to think that way, to try to get beyond that stuff, because it's hard. I mean, it's really hard, especially when you spend time around people who are like just straight up radicals. And I've spent a lot of time with those people. It can be very challenging to pull back from that. And that's something that I've got to work on myself.
Fair enough. All right, last question, one piece of business, and we'll get you on your way. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. Who's your favorite guest you've ever had on this podcast?
Besides
me.
Yeah, well, honestly, like you're up there, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. I just because I have wanted to talk to you ever since I saw that there was a piece you wrote, and I've been following you a lot more closely since how politics poisoned the evangelical church. I think it was spring of 22. But I've been familiar with your work. But when I saw that piece, I'm like, I just got to read everything this dude writes. So you're definitely up there. But, there's quite a few other folks that I would put at the top of the list. I mean, Pete Wehner and John Roush have become buddies of mine. And that's just one of the coolest things about doing this program. That guys whose work I've been following for years. I mentioned Monty Guzman. I've learned so much from her. Great journalist, great writer. And she wrote a book, came out almost exactly a year ago, called I Never Thought of It That Way, that addresses exactly the problems I'm trying to explore on this program. So there are some. But I have to say, the person that I wrote down when I was conceiving of this show, I wrote down a list of dream guests. And the number one person was David Brooks, and I got to have him on the program a couple weeks ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was so cool, but like I'm afraid that it went completely differently than I thought it would. I ended up literally crying on the interview with him. He was so gracious because there was one sensitive part of his book, a chapter in his book that hits very close to home for me that I didn't want to talk about on the recording. But David, being who he is, he asked me about it, and I just waterworks, man. So that was one part.
Well, now I feel like a failure for not making you cry.
You can only pitch the ball, man. You can't make me swing. So
that's funny.
But yeah, that's David funny. Brooks was a real treat. But there's any number of others. I've become friends with some of the folks. There's a lady named Lisa Sharon Harper that I've become dear friends with her and produce her podcast now. So there have been so many great relationships that I've forged in doing this. But David Brooks, that's when I saw one of your kids was named Brooks. I thought, oh, maybe.
No, I do like David, but no, I don't name my kids after columnists as a rule. Okay. Maybe reporters, but not columnists.
Yeah. Well, David and I have so much in common because he came to Christianity. He grew up observantly Jewish, became a Christian later in life, as did I. And his sociological, the lens that he looks at things like politics and everything else sociologically really appeals to me. So much of his political and social positions align very closely with where I end up, or maybe I end up there because I take his thinking so seriously. But yeah, that's if I had to name one, I'd have to admit that would be the one. Are you going to ask me who my favorite kid is next? Because I do have one.
No, I can't do that. No. I'm not going to get you in trouble like that.
Fair enough. So what is the best way we can follow you, find the new book, your other writing in The Atlantic, and all the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I try to keep my website somewhat regularly updated, and that's just bytimalberta.com. And then I'm on Twitter, just at Tim Alberta, and that's easy enough to find me there. And the book is released December 5th, and you can get it at Amazon, or you can get it at a great local bookshop near you, and hopefully it'll find its way under a few Christmas trees. I think there will be some folks, especially given the season, who will be interested in reading it, I hope.
December 5th, that's the day this episode will be coming out. The reason I remember that is because it's not only Walt Disney's birthday, it's my brother's birthday and my grandfather's birthday. May he rest in peace. So it was an easy date to remember when that book's coming out. Tim, this was really awesome. You did not disappoint. Hopefully the way that your Lions will not disappoint for the remainder of the year. So thanks for doing this, man.
Let's not jinx it. Well, hey, it's my pleasure. I'm no David Brooks, but I did my best. So I next time next time somebody asks you this question on your podcast, it had better be like 1A and 1B, like Brooks and Alberta.
You can count on it, man. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, if you're ever in SoCal, let me buy a dinner or a beer or something. I would love to make sure that this is not the last time we hang out. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you.
Yeah, you got a deal.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button, leave a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend about talking politics and religion without killing each other. We are super easy to recommend. It's politicsandreligion.us. It's www.politicsandreligion.us, where you can find me at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey with an E. S is in Sam, at Corey S. Nathan. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.